Hi, everybody. Welcome to the CoronaSphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, here, broadcasting from the plane of infinite despair where my headless body hovers menacingly. I hope everybody's doing well. And today's topic is the most dangerous news. I had a very pithy little thought. Let me just adjust this camera just a little bit. And I think it's about the main thing I want to cover today. I'm not going to tease you any longer than we need to. Here's why I decided to call the episode today The Most Dangerous News. As you remember, if you saw the show yesterday or watched it last night or have seen it since then, among the remarkable news that was being issued was number one, Dr. Burke said that that the mortality numbers were very, very much out of whack in terms of being far too high. CNN cut away from her for 5, 6, 7 seconds in order that news not get out. But most astonishingly, Neil Ferguson, who wrote the initial computer program that predicted 500,000 deaths in the UK, which got everybody completely lit up, needless to say, later revised his estimate from 500,000 dead and hospitals being overwhelmed by the first week in April to 20,000 dead. He said that's probably the high end and probably will not exceed capacity. I don't know how much there is to that. But here's the reason I called this episode The Most Dangerous News. Do you know what the most dangerous news you can get in the world? What's the most dangerous news you can ever hear? I think the most dangerous news is the news that you want to hear. It's hearing exactly what you want to hear. When you hear something you want to hear, you bind to it like a protein binds onto to another protein. The most dangerous news is the news that you want to hear the most. That doesn't mean the news is wrong by any means. It means that when you hear the kind of news you want to hear, you often stop looking. And this is not so much a observation on the COVID-19 outbreak, so much as it is a matter of personal psychology and something for all of us to be aware of. Last night, after hearing the revisions downward, and then Dr. Burke's comment, and then I mentioned last night that I had seen a report from the New England Journal of Medicine with Dr. Fauci. I'll read that to you again. I'll show it to you for the first time. I actually got the article in place. So here's the thumb, just so you could see that we're not talking about hack sources here. New England Journal of Medicine is virtually an unimpeachable source as well. This is a superbly, probably the definitive medical journal in the world. It's certainly one of them, and is again, this isn't the World Health Organization, but I just wanted people to see that this was coming from the New England Journal of Medicine. And if you look at the title of the article, it's COVID-19 Navigating the Uncharted by Anthony S. Fauci, MD, Clifford Lane, and Robert Redfield. Now, this article goes on, and it's basically a lot of speculation, but I want to point out what is said, and I'll read this verbatim for those of you who are listening. And I want to make it clear that what I'm doing here is not my final conclusion. You have to stay with me on this, like I say. The most dangerous news is the news you want to hear. But with that said, this is what Dr. Fauci said. You'll notice the date of the article, which I want to say, did I not include that? I want to say it was March 26th. It's recent. Here's the kind of the operative paragraph. This is Dr. Fauci and his two associates. On the basis of a case definition requiring a diagnosis of pneumonia, the currently reported case fatality rate is approximately 2%. In another article in the journal, Guan et al. Reported mortality of 1.4% among 1,099 patients with laboratory-confirmed COVID-19. These patients had a wide spectrum of disease severity. If one assumes that the number of asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic cases is several times as high as the number of reported cases, the case fatality rate may be considerably less than 1%. This suggests that the overall clinical consequences of COVID-19 may ultimately be more akin to those of a severe seasonal influenza, which has a case fatality rate of approximately 0.1%, or a pandemic influenza similar to those in 1957 and 1968, rather than a disease similar to SARS or MERS, which had case fatality rates of 9 to 10% and 36%, respectively. Respectively, excuse me, getting to be a long series of days. The most dangerous news is the news that you really want to hear. So I'm just being honest with you as a means of trying to open this up to all different aspects of this lockdown. When I heard that, and when I heard the Dr. Ferguson basically saying that his projections were wrong by a factor of 25 times, and so on and so on. By the time I woke up this morning, I said, "Man, it's pretty much over. I mean, I just don't know why we're even playing this game or continuing anymore." And that's when I realized that the news you want to hear is the most dangerous news of all. It is overwhelmingly attractive to find a credible source that backs up your position, and then once you see that, you cling to it like it's the only thing out there. Now, I think we've had a pretty compelling case made that the media is concentrating entirely on the negatives. They don't talk about the positives at all. They cut away from Dr. Birx. You've seen all of that before. But we are in a very dangerous period right now because we still don't know what these numbers are. And when you have a population of 300 million people, a 1% fatality rate is 3 million people. That's an enormous number of people. What I think we can say with some degree of certainty is that as the total information base increases in terms of the number of people who are tested, number of people who recover, a better look at the dynamics of how people who do die from it, what they die from, a look at things like how Italy counted cases of people who may have died of a heart attack but had tested positive for COVID-19, counting that as a COVID-19 thing. Every day that goes by, we get a bigger database to make our decisions from. And as I said before, we're worry machines. We're built to worry. That's what makes one of our many survival qualities is our ability to try to interpret what is going to happen. Once we developed these frontal lobes that allowed us to imagine things, we started to imagine the future, and we started to imagine what would happen if the sun didn't come up the next day. It's not a problem that raccoons have. So once you have the ability to imagine things, you start to try to imagine what's going to happen tomorrow so that you can prepare yourself. This is not only a good thing, but it's the entire basis, really, of intelligence as we know it, is the ability to look into the future and make plans. Certainly the basis of civilization. And so when you combine the ability to imagine a future with the inherent survival advantages of being worried about everything, of being prepared for the worst case scenario all the time, which again is another positive trait for a species to have, especially in times of extreme stress. I'm talking about stress on the species. I'm not talking about personal stress. I'm talking about when you're hunted by leopards or you're freezing in a cave. Worry is a good quality to have. The people that didn't worry aren't here anymore. So what we're seeing I think at this point, a little over a week into the California lockdown, and several days before the 15 days to flatten the curve expire, with all this talk about President Trump not understanding science and opening by Easter and all the rest of this stuff, we're at the most dangerous point right now because we still don't see the cataclysm that we thought we would see. I haven't seen any data, I haven't seen any graphs or any charts of how social distancing has flattened the curve. It looks like the worldwide curve is accelerating to me, and it looks like I can't see any mark on on the Johns Hopkins graph. But the United States is, is just a percentage of that, and I don't know what that is. So anyway, my entire point for this episode, and I'm not going to go any longer than the point of this episode, is that a number of virologists and a number of people looking at this have said that this is the most dangerous time because by now people are already pretty sick of this. They look out, they don't see the bring out the dead carts on the street. They think that, okay, well, maybe this whole thing was just imagined or so on. And then you see reports like the ones I mentioned yesterday and recap today and the one Dr. Fauci and so on. And you start to say, well, this whole thing's just overblown. It's a nothing. It's just, let's just stop pretending. Let's just go. It is in fact kind of like a severe flu. But this is the danger. Now, this is the main thing I would like to say about this. When you take the things that we talked about in the last several episodes, the effectiveness of the chloroquine, the ability of free enterprise to start massively producing respirators and so on, the idea of raising the bar that we have to keep the curb under, the social distancing that we've done, tremendous progress in things like the antibodies being transferred through blood plasma, the astonishingly, to me, this is the single greatest story so far, is that the projection that caused everybody to say, my God, the man who, it's not like somebody challenged that model. The person who made the model has said that, whether, I don't know what he said, it was because, I think he said it was because we've been social quarantining, and he said that about after it had been happening about 3 days, which is nothing like enough time. Whatever, it doesn't matter the reason. But the guy who made the model that predicted the biggest doomsday, 18 months of lockdown, is the same guy who said, no, I'm way wrong. We're not going to have 500,000 dead. We may have 20,000. That's a probably high-end estimate. All of this is tremendously good news. And the danger is that you see the good news and you trust it, and you don't listen to anything else. Once you get the good news, you just hang on to that, and everything else is just plain people who are not as smart as you or haven't caught up with you or haven't heard the research. And that may, in fact, be exactly the case. But it may not be. And I think probably the simplest way to think of this is, if you're in a battle and you all of a sudden look up and see the enemy retreating, you can go, woohoo. And that's a good sign. And your temptation is to chase them down and run them into the river. However, they may be running back to a more secure line. They may be drawing you into an ambush. There may be any number of reasons other than the fact that you've won this battle, that the enemy appears to be retreating. Drawing you into an ambush is a perfectly good example of this. That's how you set an ambush, is you got to put some bait out there. Maybe this whole thing is bait. And while the virus doesn't have consciousness, obviously, doesn't have plans except to multiply as much as possible, it's what it's built to do, what you end up with is a possibility that we can be lured out of our lines and out of our defensive positions by the sight of an enemy retreating and not have it be what it looks like it is, which is the end of the battle and a big victory. It also needs to be said that sometimes that is exactly what it is. So I think this is a tough time for people. Certainly my experience in Los Angeles, which is technically a lockdown city and a lockdown state, I've noticed that the number of cars on the road increases incrementally every day. It's not really even noticeable from one day to another, but if I look at what I saw today versus what I saw a week ago, it's starting to leak. One of these other pieces of good news that may be dangerous is something else that I noticed, and I don't know if anybody else has noticed it as well. There has been, on the part of the news media, an effort, Herculean effort, to identify every famous person who tests positive for COVID-19. Every single one of them. If somebody, and some, you have to dig pretty deep down this list to see who these people are. But when you find out this famous person or that famous person tested positive for COVID-19, it's in the news. I am not aware of any one of those people that I've heard of having died as a result of it. That seems to be good news. That doesn't mean anything. It's just good news. We won't know whether this is a real victory or a trap or an ambush or a retreat or a strategic withdrawal. We won't know any of this until we get some drones up there and some reconnaissance, look down on the battlefield. And in the case of the war against COVID-19, that reconnaissance is going to consist of a database, and it's going to come in the form of two different tests. One of them is a test to see whether you're positive or negative for COVID-19. If every single person in the country took that test right now, if it was a simple, and it's getting there within several, it's astonishing how fast things are moving. But just so we understand the problem, if there was an at-home test that you could take as easily as turning on a light switch and getting electricity so that virtually everybody in the country could simply do it. If we had a test to see who's got it and who doesn't, then we would have a much, much better idea of what the actual mortality rate is. Is it 2 people in 100? Is it 2 people? We know how many people die. And even then, there's some significant disagreement about how we measure that. But even if we go with the German model and say, no, this person actually died of the respiratory complications from COVID-19. Now, that's 1 death in 100, or is it 1 death in 1,000? Is it a death in 10,000? Is it a death in 100,000? We don't know. We don't know how wide the base is, so we don't know what the mortality rate is. So one piece of information would be when testing becomes available, common available, I'm certainly going to be one of the first people to test, not just because I would like to know myself, but because in a case like this, I'd like to contribute to the overall information base. I'd like to stress to our conservative stalwarts, which I still maintain I am one, that me doing this is me doing this voluntarily. If somebody was talking about kicking doors down and taking blood samples, I'd have a completely different issue with that. But I think it's for the good of the American civilization that we have this information. And I also think that the more people that get tested, the larger the base of sample is, the less severe this is going to be. I think the economy will open faster the more people who are tested, especially people who are not symptomatic. So that's number one. And number two is a test for immunity, a test for antibodies, a test that you've had it, recovered from it, and you may not have lifelong immunity, but you've certainly got immunity for months, if not a year, or something along those lines. Right now I'm saying, given where we are, beware of good news. Martin Archer just said Boris Johnson in the UK has tested positive for coronavirus. And Scott Ott wrote an article at Scrabbleface, said Britain's shocked by the difference between Boris Johnson's before and after photographs. So I clicked this link, and it turns out that the after picture and the before picture are the same picture. The guy looks like he's just come through a washing machine in both cases. So anyway, it's that. There has been some tremendously good news. And I don't mean good news in terms of ways to, I don't think the word is mediate. I know what's the word I'm looking for. Suppress the disease. There's some very good news in terms of how severe this may be from the people originally said this is a major, major, major crisis. That's great news. So all I'm saying is mitigate. Thank you. All I'm saying is look at good news, be grateful for good news. We've gotten a fleet of good news. in the last several days. Just rafts of it, all of it good, and that can be dangerous. So there's that. One final little note, and you can just kind of count this as a pet peeve in a way for me. I was listening to Bill Gates on CNN, and apparently Bill Gates has been studying this problem for a long time, and I will say that he certainly seems to know what he's talking about with regard to this, and he hasn't been overtly political, no matter how hard they try to make him overtly political, but but this thought did cross my mind. People are talking to Bill Gates, and they're basically saying, well, geez, Bill, you've known about this for 15, 20 years. You saw this coming. You knew this was coming. I hear this again and again and again. Bill Gates knew it was coming. Bill Gates has been warning us. Bill Gates has been doing all of this stuff. Bill Gates, it sounds like it's true. I'm sure it is true. I'm sure Bill Gates has been talking about this for quite a long time. I'm sure Bill Gates has been trying to warn people for quite a long time. But I had the thought in passing, watching Bill Gates on CNN, that Bill Gates is not a research scientist working at the Center for Disease Control or at the University of Pennsylvania. Bill Gates has $100 billion. And for me, it does kind of raise the question somewhat that if you are so convinced that this is going to happen, that it's just a matter of time, and that the government and no one else is doing anything, the thought occurred to me that you might want to take $2 or $3 billion, which is what you will lose in stock if this happens anyway, immeasurably less than what you would lose in stock. Seems to me that if I had $100 billion and I knew that this catastrophe was coming, and everybody says you've been warning everybody for a long time, I think I might have also, I don't know, built a bunch of ventilators or stockpiled a bunch of masks or all of the things that the government didn't do that he's talking about, things that we should have done and didn't do. None of this is Apollo program level spending. I just I think this is why this bothers me so much. I don't see I don't understand is probably a better way. I don't understand the virtue of talking to somebody who's been yelling about this the whole time and saying, geez, you were right, but who had the resources to actually put in place virtually all of the things that weren't in place. And what I mean by that is I don't understand how you're Bill Gates in that situation. And that's because I don't understand billionaires. I don't understand them, and I'll never will. I can't get my mind around the fact that I could colonize Mars and come back and still have $50 billion. I can't process how that works. I guess that's how you become a billionaire. But it is a little annoying to me to see Bill Gates purring like a kitten about all of his predictions coming true. And he does not have an obligation to do any of this. I'm not suggesting that for a second. But it does make me wonder a little bit about the general dynamic of it. If I had $100 billion and I could see an oncoming world catastrophe, and I knew that the necessary measures were not in place, I'd put my money where my mouth is. That's what I would do. Dave Big Booty points out he doesn't have $100 billion. He's worth $100 billion. Yes, there's a big difference between that and ready cash. However, net worth can be converted into cash, and he doesn't have to convert the whole $100 billion. I'd be curious to know how many effective virus masks $10 million would buy. I'm just curious. Anyway, this is not so much to basically dump on Bill Gates as it is to point out that to the degree that people like Bill Gates, or Bill Gates in particular, said, I've been warning people and the government didn't do anything. Okay, well, you've been warning people and you didn't do anything either, and you could have. I don't know. That just seems like it's something I needed to say it because I just watched the interview and that was a thought I couldn't get out of my head. So that's it for this edition of the CoronaSphere Lounge. No reason to elongate shows where I don't have many more data. We'll be back tomorrow, Saturday, and kind of trying to look at kind of the social aspect of this more than the medical aspect, things like the psychology, things of how people behave in groups, trying to clarify the fact that the president has something else to worry about besides just saving lives. He's got the economy, he's got to balance too, and that's not the same as what virologists have to do. So, anyway, there has been a raft of good news lately, and so much good news that I find myself saying, this whole thing is so completely overblown. Maybe it is, but maybe it's not. And so this is the value of reason, of self-examination, and especially just a little bit of humility. And just a little bit of humility. When I woke up this morning realizing, man, this is just like, we're good. We're out of it. Nothing to worry about. That's when I said, well, be careful. Be careful. Your opinion, that's not my line, but it's something somebody once said, that your opinion is the point at which you stop thinking about things. And I thought that's pretty profound. So keep our eyes open, keep our ears open, be grateful for the good news, and try to make sense out of the data in a rational way without going overboard. Going overboard would have been me saying, he said it was the flu 25 times. Woo! That's the difference between being reasonable and being reactionary. And we need to be reasonable. We need to be careful. We need to be safe. We need to get back to work as quickly as we can. If the good news that we've seen turns out to be true, then we will not be in for the kind of hayride we thought we were going to be in for, and things will recover more quickly. Let's hope that's true. But let's not assume it's true. Let's just keep doing what we're doing, which is doing good. And I am looking forward to, I don't know how much longer it will be before we start to see it, but somewhere in the not too distant future, we should start to see some kind of effect on what all of this sacrifice has accomplished in terms of the growth curve for COVID-19 here in the United States. That'll do it for this edition of the CoronaSphere Lounge. We've picked up a lot of new members at BillWhittle.com lately, and every time I say that, Scott is exactly the same page as I am on this one. Every time we say that, we are enormously grateful for the new members and very, very glad to have you, not just to keep this message going. We think the biggest member benefit that we provide is the ability to interact with other people who are just like you, which, as you probably know by now, are a pretty rare group of folks. So we're very, very glad to have you. And as I said, Scott and I are always keenly aware of the fact that we are especially grateful for those of you who've been with us from the beginning and continue to be with us, and have kept this enterprise going for as long as it has, and allow us to continue to go out there and do some good and help people, if you'll pardon the expression, breathe a little easier during this interesting times that we live in. So that's it for episode 8. We'll see you tomorrow for episode 9 right here on the CoronaSphere Lounge. Thanks for watching. Be careful. Don't let the guard down. Don't get cocky. And I'll see you tomorrow.